as I promised, I am doing the movie marathon video where I'm going down a bunch of different horror movie sequels and remakes, and primarily it's really only 2 remakes that we're going to be looking at, and the rest are basically a bunch of sequels. Although some, I guess, kind of work their way into being spiritual remakes. There's a couple of other movies that I could have talked about here, but I feel like some of them would work better as separate reviews. Stuff like Alien Resurrection, the Predator reboot from 2018, Spiral from the Book of Saw, God, a couple of other ones. Scream 4, which I didn't like, but I didn't really think it was bad enough to be categorized in this video. So I whittled it down to 7 movies that I'm going to be talking about, and I tried to limit it to 1 movie per franchise because I feel like there's plenty to talk about with some of the sequels that we're going to be talking about as it is. So yeah, 1 movie per franchise. And just like the last movie marathon, there will be timestamps in the description so you can jump from movie to movie. It's kind of hard to categorize this video, but I feel like I should just go in terms of the release dates for each of these movies. So with that in mind, we're going to be starting with the big boy himself, Jason Voorhees. We're going to start with 1993's Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. The Friday the 13th movies have a very interesting history. Paramount liked the fact that they were easy to produce and that they made them a lot of money, but they hated the fact that they were getting well known basically for making a bunch of movies that celebrated, teens having sex and doing drugs and blood and violence. It was the 80s. It was a lot of moral panic was going on at the time. And the MPAA made it no secret that they loved whittling these movies down and taking out as much as possible. And the Friday the 13th movies, like a lot of these franchises, you kind of pick and choose which ones you like, which ones you don't like. I personally really like Part 6 and Part 7. I think Jason Lives is like the definitive Friday the 13th movie. That movie just has Jason doing his thing, and he does it well. And Part 7 has a kind of interesting concept. It's basically just Jason versus Carrie, without it technically being Carrie. They wanted to do Freddy versus Jason, but, Paramount, New Line Cinema, all these writers and directors, they just couldn't come to a conclusion. Each studio wanted their guy to win. As the movies kept going, they slowly started losing money as opposed to gaining money. And the one that was super apparent with this was Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, which they had such a limited budget to work with that the movie, despite its title, only takes place in New York in the last 10-15 minutes. And, there's nothing like them going to the Statue of Liberty or the Chrysler Building or the Brooklyn Bridge. None of that. It's just a bunch of running around back alleys, which were actually Vancouver because it was cheaper to film there. After the failure of that, Paramount basically put Jason Voorhees on the chopping block and put his name up for auction, and the first person to get their hands on the character of Jason was New Line Cinema. So it seemed that we could probably get a Freddy vs. Jason sooner, but they were still working on that. Wes Craven was doing New Nightmare, so they were like, all right, well, let's just keep Jason in the public eye. And hey, we already did Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, so let's have Jason die, so that way he goes to hell, and then him and Freddy Krueger can come face to face, and then we can work on Freddy vs. Jason. And so, this movie, it has a hell of a production. Sean Cunningham, the guy that created the first Friday the 13th, he made it no secret he hated the Friday sequels, and he hated the fact that Jason became the main killer. He hated the fact that Jason was running around with a machete and hockey mask. Basically everything that people came to love about the series, he hated it. So he wanted to get rid of it as much as possible. And so then you have a bunch of different writers, a bunch of different elements of a bunch of different scripts end up getting lumped into one fucked up movie. One thing that is very apparent with this movie, as well as some of the other sequels and other movies that we'll be talking about, it absolutely misses the point of the main killers. And in this case, they get Jason all kinds of wrong. Because in this movie, okay, some of these movies have had supernatural elements. Like, yeah, okay, Jason's basically a zombie running around killing people. It's like, that's, sure, supernatural, whatever. But in this movie, they just go to like this weird Lovecraftian level where it doesn't even feel like it's the same movie anymore. Even part 7, which had a knockoff Carrie, felt more in league with these movies than this one does, because basically they established that, oh, no, Jason, he wasn't just some scared, sad little boy from Camp Crystal Lake. That wasn't him. No. Apparently Jason is now this fucking hell demon slug that can hop into people's mouths and possess their bodies. If he stays in someone's body too long, they end up melting, so he has to like hop from person to person. It is just so like out of left field, and I want to give him points for being original. And I was thinking that with a lot of these movies. I want to give him points for at least trying to do something different, but it just feels so bizarre. Compared to some of the other sequels in the Friday series, it just doesn't work. Just like in Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, they established this character that we've never seen before, so now there's some kind of connection to the killer. In that movie, it was Freddy's estranged daughter, Catherine, and here you have this woman who just so happens to be in connection to the Voorhees family. Because then they come up with this lame excuse that, oh, the only way to get Jason back to who he once was is if he ends up possessing someone that's from his family bloodline. There's a bunch of stuff like that too, like, oh, there's the Voorhees house. Yeah, okay, there's the Michael Myers house in Halloween, but that makes sense with those movies. There's the Elm Street house in the Elm Street movies. That makes sense for those movies. The closest thing to a Voorhees house was Jason's shack in the second movie. And then they go into the Voorhees house and, oh, look, there's the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead movies. I mean, if anything, I guess it is kind of cool that it inspired the Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash comics. That's something, I guess. I learned about this after the fact, but there's a bunch of points in the movie where it's like, I feel like there should be another character from the previous movies that we should be following here. Like, the main girl's boyfriend, he's very similar to Tommy Jarvis from parts 4, 5, and 6. And even though, there obviously wasn't a consistent actor between the movies, Tommy Jarvis was essentially the closest thing to like a Laurie Strode or a Nancy from Nightmare on Elm Street. Tommy Jarvis was the one person who actually seemed like he had a consistent story all throughout these films. Just while doing research on the movie, I did find out that the reason they couldn't get Tommy Jarvis to be in the movie was because New Line only had the rights to Jason Voorhees. They didn't have the rights to Friday the 13th or some of the other characters. Paramount still technically owned that, but Jason Voorhees was up for grabs. So yeah, that's why we don't see some other characters from these movies come back. And the closest thing they have to a character who's like a Dr. Loomis type, who's an expert on the killer, is this new character called Creighton Duke, who he comes in and he just has all the knowledge on Jason Voorhees. And it's like, this character, yeah, he is just kind of there for exposition, but I kind of like what they're doing. The actor is very charismatic.
What you think of as Jason is not Jason. That body he's wearing, that's just meat. That boy knows how to dress. He wears other people's bodies like folks wear a suit. Or he may get blown up, but that's just a little minor inconvenience for him. He'll just get himself another body. Jason Voorhees, the true Jason Voorhees. Something you and I have never seen before, Mr. Kim.
But yeah, it just feels like he just comes right out of nowhere. It's like, what is his relation to Jason? I will say too, one of the better things about this movie is I liked the ending. Other than those few things, other than Creighton Duke, I liked the Freddy ending, and I liked the fact that it kind of tried to do something different. It just feels like it went too extreme. It felt like it was a little too different for its own good. Turning Jason from a scared little boy who was way too attached to his mom who tried to carry on her legacy, after death, and have it that he's a zombie that comes back to life every so often and doesn't like people interfering with his territory, his campgrounds, and turning him into this hell slug that can take over people's bodies just feels like a really weird turn out of left field. There's a reason that this is a very divisive movie amongst Friday fans, because this movie just goes off the fucking rails. So, seeing how that's what they did to Jason, let's move on to how they screwed up Michael Myers. And oh man, there's plenty of bad sequels from the Halloween series to talk about. I was very tempted to talk about the Rob Zombie remake, but really, other than, I could just say, it's a Rob Zombie movie. It's like, yeah, you give Michael Myers a trailer trash backstory that his dad was abusive and he had a stripper for a mother and his sister was mean to him. I also know some people aren't partial to these recent Halloween movies like Halloween Kills, which I didn't see in full, so I can't really say. I only caught a little bit of it on TV, and I wasn't really impressed with what I saw. And I didn't even see Halloween Ends yet, and I know that movie's incredibly mixed. But I felt like, you know what? It came down to one of two options. And I'm not going to do Halloween Resurrection because that movie was just a sequel that nobody was asking for. Halloween H2O, say what you want about it, actually had a pretty solid wrap-up. Like, Michael Myers gets his head cut off with an axe in that one. It's like, okay, he ain't coming back from that. And Halloween Resurrections just comes along and had to forge some forced bullshit to be like, oh no, it turned out that actually wasn't Michael Myers. No, that was actually just a guy that Michael switched costumes with. Yeah, so Michael Myers is still technically out there. And also, it's the one that has Michael Myers getting burned alive by Busta Rhymes spitting one-liners. Like I said, I'm not going to talk about that one, because that's the one that nobody was really asking for. That one was only made just because Halloween H2O did really well. The one that I want to talk about is Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. The first two movies feel very conclusive, because the second one literally takes place on the same night that the events of the first one do. And Halloween 3 came out and, tried taking things in an anthology direction, and people were like, oh, what the hell is this? There's no Michael Myers killing people. What's that? And then years after the fact, people go, if this wasn't called Halloween, people probably would have loved it. And then you get to parts 4, 5, and 6, which basically serve as their own movies. They went back to the Michael Myers formula, but they didn't have Jamie Lee Curtis, so they had to try and come up with something new. Because of that, you have a bunch of different names for this trilogy. You have the Jamie Lloyd trilogy, the Thorn trilogy. My personal favorite is the Pink Panther trilogy. Part 4 basically just kind of felt like another Michael Myers story, but it did introduce the new character of Jamie Lloyd, who is Michael's niece. And basically she becomes Michael's new target because Michael is trying to eliminate everyone from his family. And so they continued that into Part 5, and Part 5 has a lot of really dumb bullshit in it. I mean, that's the one that ends with him getting arrested, and the cops don't take his mask and put it in an evidence locker. They just let him sit in a jail cell with his mask on. They turn around for 2 seconds, and then the jail cell that he was sitting in, the bars are broken. Michael Myers is on the loose. Gotta be another one. And the fifth one also had this shady character walking around with like a black trench coat and a large black fedora covering his face. And so, we're going to get a conclusion to who this shady character is. And much like Jason Goes to Hell, this one's known for having a very troubled production. And this is the one everyone seems to remember because there's 2 different cuts. There's the producer's cut and the theatrical cut. They age Jamie Lloyd a little bit up. And the movie begins with her having a child, and she's being contained somewhere. And it turns out that she's being held captive by this cult. This thorn cult, and they all have this thorn symbol on their wrists. And they go into what this thorn symbol means. It's some kind of ancient Celtic Satanist type of symbol.
Druids were also great mathematicians and astronomers, but the thorn symbol is actually a constellation of stars that appears from time to time on Halloween night. Whenever it appears, he appears.
They try to connect it back to the first 2 movies because you have the boy that Jamie Lee Curtis was watching in the first movie, Tommy Doyle. He basically tags along in this movie, and from what I can tell, the producers tried to make him a more hip version of Dr. Loomis, because there's one cut of the movie that just straight up has less Dr. Loomis because they thought he was too old and too boring. And so, yeah, you got young Tommy Doyle Basically trying to be the hip young version of that. He's trying to chase after Michael Myers and stop his reign of evil. And interestingly enough, he's played by a young Paul Rudd.
It's okay, man. It's okay.
It's funny, me and my family have this running gag where every time we see a movie and Paul Rudd just happens to show up in it, we're like, man, Paul Rudd's in every movie. Apparently that's even more true now. Apparently Paul Rudd found a way to work himself into a Halloween sequel. So yeah, Tommy Doyle is now a young adult. He lives across the street from the Myers house, which, of course, in the grand tradition of these movies, looks nothing like it did in the first one. And, of course, just so happens to be a family that moves into the Myers house. And, of course, Michael is now after them because they're in his house. You have this older asshole father, husband guy, his wife that he just nags around, their son, his girlfriend, and their daughter, who also has a son. And basically they try to establish that the son is being like indoctrinated to become the next Michael Myers.
Before you came around, everything was going fine till you landed on our doorstep. You and that little bastard even.
I see only one bastard in this house.
You ever talk to me like that again, and so help me God. You understand?
They're trying to build it up that he's going to be the next in line to take over for Michael Myers, which doesn't end up happening. Going along with the whole thing of Jamie having a baby, that basically becomes a huge part of it. They're trying to figure out like where this baby came from, and they try to help Jamie get out of there. One cut of the movie has Jamie die once they get her to the hospital, and I think the theatrical cut has it that she dies like super early on when she's trying to escape. Then you get to how they did Michael in this movie. And the thing is, basically, you have it that the Thorn cult uses Michael Myers to go out and kill people for blood sacrifices. And it's like, it takes away any mystique that Michael Myers had. He's just a crazy person in a mask who you cannot reason with and you can't get away from. That's it. And then, the second movie kind of elaborated on it, like, oh yeah, he's trying to kill all surviving members of his family or people who are in his house, whatever. But with this movie, it basically just reduces Michael Myers to a cult leader's henchman who stands around waiting for orders. That's it. In the theatrical cut, they have it that he eventually snaps and just starts killing all the cult members with really disorienting strobe effects. Okay, the whole subplot with the baby, man. It turns out that the baby was the offspring of Michael Myers.
You know whose baby it is, don't you?
Michael!
The baby is yours, isn't it? Isn't it, Michael?
What did the cult gain from having Michael Myers impregnate his niece to create an inbred offspring that he would inevitably have to kill? What was the point of that? And you get to the two endings of how they kill Michael in this thing. One ending has it that Loomis catches up with him, and Loomis makes an anti-Thorn symbol out of stones on the ground, which immobilizes him like a statue. Then, it turns out that actually wasn't Michael. It was the cult leader who also was Dr. Wynn, a throwaway character from the first movie who Loomis was working with. What a twist! And then this one ends basically implying that Michael is now still on the loose because, he switched costumes with Wynn. And then Loomis looks on his wrist and he now has the Thorn symbol. So he's now Michael's caretaker, or he's gonna be the new killer. It's a trade-off. One has more Dr. Loomis and one has more Michael Myers. But in the theatrical cut, Michael Myers gets beaten to a pulp by Paul Rudd with a lead pipe. They're talking to Loomis, and Loomis says like, I have some unfinished business. And then it shows Michael's mask on the ground with a syringe next to it. Like many other people have said before me, Halloween 6 is a mess. And that's why I chose to talk about Halloween 6 instead of Halloween Resurrection. Halloween Resurrection is just a cheap cash grab on both the Halloween franchise and also the whole shaky cam Blair Witch type of thing that was going on at the time. This one it's a mess. No matter what way you look at it, pick your poison, man, because I seriously didn't enjoy either the theatrical cut or the producer's cut. Yes, one of them is a little bit more consistent, but you'd be hard-pressed for me to say that it was a good Halloween sequel. So jumping forward a little bit, we are now out of the 90s. We are in the 2000s. We are up to the 8th Hellraiser movie, Hellworld. Now, I was stuck between this or Hellraiser 4, Bloodline, which is the one that has Pinhead in space. I heard nothing but shit things about Hellworld, and I was not disappointed. Hellworld is awful. Seeing how this is a 2000s horror movie, they of course try to work in some contemporary things into the plot, and in this case they try to work in video games and the internet, because the main group of characters you follow are a bunch of video gamers, you know, people who play games online on this game on this website called Hellworld, and one of their friends recently passed away. Now, I love how in this movie, these are supposed to be people who play video games regularly, and yet none of them look like nerds. They don't even have one token nerdy friend. Everybody looks like a GQ model. And it's like, yeah, no, not buying that. I don't really want to say that this movie is one of those movies where it tries to peddle the whole, the internet is scary and, you know, don't let your kids use the internet, or, oh, video games turn you into serial killers or whatever. But I will say it definitely feels like it's kind of like preying on those fears, because, I mean, there's a point where, you know, because you have a character constantly saying throughout the movie, oh, it's just a game. It was just a game. It's just a game, man. It's not a big deal. Like, he didn't die because of the game. Like, you know, it's other things. And then at one point, Pinhead just says, is it a game now?
Is it just a game now, Jake?
So, of course, this small ragtag team of friends get invited to a party because they're avid players of Hellworld. And so once they get to this party, it's like, oh, you get masks and, you know, and code numbers, and there's anonymous sex and, you know, just sin galore. And so of course, slowly, one by one, these people get picked off by Pinhead and the Cenobites. Now, this is something I actually read about, that apparently studios and writers couldn't really decide how they wanted to capture the character of Pinhead. They didn't know if they should have him crack some one-liners like Freddy Krueger or Chucky, or if he should be more stoic and serious. And this movie, like, they have Pinhead say some really stupid shit in this. Personally, I think that Hellraiser 1, 2, and 3 are probably my favorite of the series, and then I kind of stopped caring after that. Especially since they're pretty much just churning out straight-to-video sequels for like the last few years. And I think just recently, this year, a couple weeks ago even, they did a Hulu remake. But yeah, from what I can tell, Pinhead is kind of a hard character to crack. Like a lot of the other movies that we're talking about, misses the point with the characters. And, you know, whether it's turning Jason into a hell demon slug that can possess people's bodies, or Michael Myers as a cult leader's henchman, here, the Pinhead and the Cenobites typically take pleasure in torturing people slowly. You know, that's their thing. But here, they just kill people like it's nothing. They just kill people quick and easily. And the entire time I just couldn't help but think, like, that's not what the Cenobites are about. They're all about torture. They're supposed they take pleasure in torturing people slowly. That's their thing. But no, in this movie they just kill people quickly, easily, and lazily. Aside from just generic main characters that I didn't care about, and, you know, completely missing the point of Pinhead and the Cenobites, the one thing that just really annoyed me was the whole, you know, internet thing, because it's just like, it was really tacky. It felt really on the nose. Like, there were a bunch of these techno-fear movies where it's like, oh, you can't trust your cell phone, you can't trust your VHSs, you can't trust your video games and the internet. And this one, it was just like, wow, they really had to fucking rope that into a Hellraiser sequel, really?
Adam was right.
Now, this next one I talked about in another video, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. And I actually know a few people who actually are quite partial to this one, so I'm not going to harbor on it too long. But for the Child's Play franchise, I was caught between either the 2019 remake, the third movie, or this one, Seed of Chucky. My biggest criticism with this movie is that it's just too silly for its own good. And I know some people like that. And you know what? Like, I want to say right now, with some of these movies, if you like them, that's totally fine. Like, I know a ton of people who actually like some of the aspects of these movies. Some people watch them as so bad they're good. Some people like the creativity and the fact that they were different. And that's totally fine. And I could definitely see it with this one. Like, I know some people who like I like Bride of Chucky just fine, but Seed of Chucky felt like it was a little too wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like, oh, look, we got celebrity cameos. We got people playing themselves and making fun of their careers. Oh, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Oh, we got Chucky knocking a Britney Spears lookalike off the road and then saying, oops, I did it again.
Son of a bitch! Up yours, asshole!
Oops, I did it again.
Okay, yeah, it follows up the events of Bride of Chucky, that Chucky and Tiffany had a baby. It starts off with the name Shithead and is with this, like, Marilyn Manson ventriloquist guy in England. And then he works his way over to Hollywood because the remains of Chucky and Tiffany's bodies have been taken and turned into movie props. And so he's able to bring his parents back to life with the amulet that he got from the last movie. And so now Chucky and Tiffany are alive, and they name the kid Glenn or Glenda because it's a doll. It's, as Alan Rickman said in Dogma, as anatomically correct as a Ken doll. Nothing down there. Continuing with the theme of Chucky and Tiffany trying to swap their bodies with humans, they seek after Jennifer Tilly, playing herself, as well as playing Tiffany, obviously. And you know what? I give Jennifer Tilly an insane amount of credit, and this was probably the best thing in the movie. Like, each of these movies have, like, one person who seems to, like, be the glue that's holding it together. I gotta say, Jennifer Tilly was probably the best thing in this movie. She is really funny, and she's actually really good at poking fun at herself. So, you know what? Bravo.
Just think, Jennifer Tilly's playing me in a movie. It's absolutely perfect casting.
But that voice!
I know, she sounds just like an angel.
But yeah, they have their sights on Jennifer Tilly and Redman, and goes without saying, but Redman is one of those rappers who, I'm sorry, cannot act.
Mary, you are truly a vision of unsullied innocence, unique among all women, as pure as the virgin snow. But I ask, what is troubling you?
There's also, I will say, kind of fun John Waters cameo. He's like a tabloid journalist trying to get saucy pictures. It's like, all right, well, John Waters got a paycheck. That's kind of cool. But other than that, like I said, too much wink, wink, nudge, nudge moments of like, you know, oh, see what we're doing? Yeah, we're being clever. Yeah, see, we're being self-referential. Honestly, just didn't mean anything. And the other thing that I noticed about this movie, really pointless side characters. It's like, you know, there's a lot of stuff with like, oh, Jennifer Tilly has a limo driver who has a crush on her. And she has a personal assistant, and there's a bunch of scenes with her. And it's just like, yeah, that's fine and all, but like, you know, can we please go back to the killer doll stuff? And speaking of, there was this really pointless interval in the middle of the movie where, you know, their child, Glenn/Glenda, doesn't like murder, so they promise that they're not going to kill anybody anymore.
Promise me, Chucky, no more killing.
No.
Chucky.
No
more killing. We can't do it anymore. We have a future to think of. We have a child.
Fine. All right already.
And then they just keep doing that all throughout the movie. And it's like, it's a really pointless story beat that goes nowhere.
What's so great about being human anyway? You get sick. You get old. You can't get it up anymore. I'm not looking forward to that. I'm one of the most notorious slashers in history, and I don't want to give that up. I am Chucky, the killer dog.
I will say this, though, as a person that has kept up with the series, I do like that they were able to kind of bring it back to its roots with stuff like Curse of Chucky and Cult of Chucky. I haven't seen the TV show, but I do think that from those two movies, I do kind of want to check it out, because it seems like they actually are kind of bringing it back to like a centralized plot that does pick up from the elements of Seed, but kind of brings it back to its original roots. You know, it tries to be mostly serious horror, but there is some light comedy thrown in, which was good. I like that aspect of those movies. But this definitely leans way more on comedy than it does horror. So.
A masturbating midget?
One of the original writers came back. It's like, this was still Don Mancini, who worked on the other Chucky movies, so you can clearly tell that this was something he wanted to do, and he kind of wanted to experiment more with the comedic side of it. And like I said before, Bride of Chucky had comedic moments in it, and there was some kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge stuff in that, but that one was at least more consistent. Like, it had some better kills in it compared to this one. I don't know. So now moving out of the 2000s, we move on to the 2010s, and this is one of the two remakes we're going to be talking about, and we're talking about the 2010 Nightmare on Elm Street. First off, in this movie, instead of having Freddy Krueger be a child killer, he was a child molester, which, yes, that was part of the original script for the original movie from '84, but there's a reason that they scrapped that. It's like, keep it mostly consistent. And one of the few things that starts off kind of interesting, but then it ultimately is pointless, is the fact that they kind of have like a bait and switch moment where it's like, oh, they try to hint that maybe Freddy was innocent and, you know, the town burned him alive for no reason and they killed an innocent man. Like, the two main characters, Nancy and Quentin, they go to Quentin's dad, played by Clancy Brown. That was kind of interesting. But they go to him and it's like, you killed an innocent man and you tried to cover it up. We were 5. We didn't know what we were talking about.
Chased him, you cornered him, and you burned him to death. You hunted him.
We did not hunt him. We were protecting him.
From what?
From him. From what he did to you. From what you kids told us he
We were
would.
5. We would have said anything. Why didn't you go to the police?
You were so young.
No, God, and the things we said he did.
Go to Freddy's old trailer and they find a bunch of pictures of the stuff that he did and they're like, oh my gosh, he really was a child molester all along. It's like, yeah, no shit.
We were wrong. He's not after us because we lied. He's after us because we told the truth.
I think it would have been more interesting if it turned out that Freddy was actually blamed for killings done by another person. And so now that he's burned and dead, and, you know, then he made a deal with the dream demons or whatever, and now he's going to get revenge on the people who killed him by killing them in their dreams. That kind of would have been interesting. It's like, have it that Freddy was innocent and blamed for murders that he didn't do, and then he wants to get revenge on the people who killed him by killing their kids. Kind of like in the original. Like, in the original, there was an excuse for it. It's like, okay, yes, Freddy was a child killer, and the parents burned him as a last resort, as an act of like mob justice or whatever, because in the original they say that it was taken to court and he got away scot-free. So the parents, you know, as a last-minute resort, they burned him alive. In this movie, they don't even have the court case. Here it's like, oh, he apparently tried to skip town, and then we decided to hunt him down and burn him alive. This is just one thing. And I know this is a very 2010 thing to talk about, but the CG in this, like, the gore effects aren't that bad, but sometimes the CG, and especially whenever they try to recreate specific scenes from the original 80s one, like the scene where Freddy, you know, peers out from, you know, above the bed. You know, in the original movie, it was just done with sheet and a hole through a wall, and it looked really good. But in this one, it's CG, and it looks like shit. one thing that I did like about this movie was I genuinely did like Jackie Earle Haley as Freddy. I mean, he's no Robert Englund. Robert Englund is the definitive Freddy Krueger to me. Even in the stupidest moments in some of the sequels, Robert Englund is fucking Freddy Krueger, man. He brought that character to life. He made it something special. For what it's worth, Jackie Earle Haley actually does an okay job as Freddy Krueger. He kind of tries to bring it back to being scary. And he does have the occasional one-liner, but he actually doesn't do it that bad.
You really shouldn't fall asleep in class.
Going back to my complaint about CG, man, the fact that they CG'd his face, it's like he has some prosthetics, but like they CGI'd his eyes. Why? It just feels like Michael Bay, who is the producer of this, it feels like Michael Bay just sat there and was like, we got fucking money to blow. We don't have to do all the facial makeup. We could just CGI that shit and people wouldn't notice.
What do you want from me? I don't know, Jesse. You think you could turn back time? Answer me! No. Do you think you can bring the dead back to life? No. No! No! I didn't fucking think so.
Far from the worst horror remake ever, like there's a few interesting things that they do, like trying to make it a mystery. If they played more up to that, it would have been better. But, you know, just, oh, we didn't know what we were talking about. We were kids. We were 5. You killed an innocent man. Then the next scene, oh, they were right. He was a child molester all along. It's like, that's not a mystery. What? And, you know, Jackie Earle Haley's performance, I liked. But other than that, it just felt like a really arbitrary remake. It just felt like the kind of remake that exists just so they could, you know, show off, oh, look, we got a budget. Look, CG up in this bitch. See, it's better than your practical effects. And it's like, no, it's not. It doesn't have the same heart. It just doesn't. Jackie Earle Haley was carrying that fucking movie on his back. It's like, I felt so bad for him. Although apparently Robert Englund liked his performance, so you know what? That's good.
Little Nancy. Now that you got me, what game do you want to play next?
Fuck you.
Ooh, sounds like fun.
It was hard to pick just one movie from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series, especially with that really shitty looking 2022 remake that came out this year where you have Leatherface going up against a bunch of social media influencers. That just looked like such shit, but I'm like, I'm not ready to watch that one yet. So I'm just going to say, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I like the first 2, and the second one I only really like because I appreciate that, you know, Tobe Hooper, the director, he pretty much just got to do whatever he wanted. He pulled a Joe Dante. He's like, I don't want to make the same movie again. I'm just going to make it a comedy. First one, genuinely great horror film, and the second one, it's a lot goofier, obviously, but I can at least appreciate Tobe Hooper for trying to do something different. Third one, didn't care for. Next Generation, didn't care for. There was apparently one from 2017 that I totally forgot even existed. And obviously there's the Platinum Dune remake and the prequel that came out after it. But I decided, you know what? I hated this one. When I remember watching it the year it came out. So I'm going to talk about Texas Chainsaw 3D. Unlike something like Friday the 13th Part 3, where it's, you know, it's kind of that cheesy, gimmicky 80s 3D, but it's kind of fun. This one just screams like post-Avatar, IMAX. We're going to show this in 2 different theaters, and one's going to be at a jacked up price so you can watch the same movie with stupid sunglasses on 3D. That's what this movie pretty much feels like. I mean, there are times where they do lunge things at the screen, but it's just so like, it's like they do it like 5 times. And it's just like, that even for a movie with 3D in the title, that's nothing. Then you get to what they do to Leatherface here. They basically turn Leatherface into the anti-hero at the end of this thing. Even from the beginning, they try to make it like, man, isn't it wrong and horrible that the people of this town hunted down the family and burned their house down? It's like, they're cannibals. They kidnap and kill people and then eat them. They're the villains. even in part 2, where they kind of give Leatherface a little bit more of a sympathetic background, they still recognize that he was a bad guy. But in this movie, no. They basically just make it, he's a sad 10-year-old boy trapped in a man's body. And it was so horrible that all these things happened to them. Despite this movie basically being a pseudo-remake of the first movie, they also try to play it off as a sequel. Because, so you have it that, you know, the house with the family is burned down. And there's this girl who survives, and she ends up growing up to become Leatherface's cousin. And that's revealed a little bit later on in the movie. So, just like in the first movie, they go traveling, and they pick up a hitchhiker. They pass an armadillo on the road, just like in the first one. They come across the house, and Leatherface is in the basement. He ends up killing this girl's friends. And halfway through the movie, they not only reveal that she is related to Leatherface, that they are cousins, but they also go into, man, isn't it just so horrible what happened to him? You're supposed to feel bad for Leatherface, the guy that goes around killing people with a chainsaw and eating them.
There, you will discover a metal door. Behind it lives your cousin, Jedediah Sawyer, your only remaining blood relative. He is family-bound and will protect you. He simply requires your care in return.
Kind of like when you see people on Twitter standing for the guy that plays Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, in the last few Dahmer movies that have come out, not just this recent one, but a couple of other ones. And there's girls like simping for the actors, and they don't know that Jeffrey Dahmer is a real person. And you're just like, I hope they know that Jeffrey Dahmer is a real person and not someone to look up to. There's this guy that the main girl falls in love with, and he's a cop in this town. And eventually she figures out about like what this town and the sheriffs did to her family. They burned down the house, and he basically becomes the new villain. And there's this moment at the end where I fucking facepalm so hard, where, you know, oh, Leatherface shows up. He's gonna save his cousin because blood is thicker than water. And then she kicks his chainsaw over to him, and she goes, "Do your thing, cuz."
That's right. Do your thing, cuz.
And I was just. This is a 2013 horror film, and not a very good one, but I just gotta say, the acting in this is terrible. And like, I'm not surprised because I looked up one of the guys that's in this, one of the friends that ends up getting killed, is played by some singer. He's some guy called Trey Songz. He's like one of those like R&B Jason Derulo type guys, and I'm just like, really? That was the best you could do, casting director? Seriously?
Real. Price tag.
What the fuck are you doing?
Nobody's looking.
Listen, it was one time. I had like 18 kamikazes, come on.
Come on, you begged for it.
And now I'm begging you to keep your hands off my shit.
Last thing I want to talk about with this movie, since we're talking about the cast, I just gotta point out, the sense of time in this movie is all kinds of fucked. Because it's like, okay, they kill the family, you know, by burning them alive in like the 70s. And then the girl grows up to be like, you know, 20 years old. And it's like, okay, so what, this is like roughly the 90s? But then later you see people walking around with modern technology using cell phones.
Looks like it leads to this door.
Push it open.
They're basically implying it takes place in the current year of 2013 when it came out. And it's like, shouldn't she be like 40 years old? Like, she's 20? Like, what? Like, when did this happen? Like, it's really fucking strange. The sense of time in this movie is all kinds of fucked up. And so we come to the last, and weirdly enough, it's attached to a series that some may say didn't even have dignity to begin with. But you know what? Let's talk about the shittiest Leprechaun movie with Leprechaun Origins. Say what you want. The Leprechaun movies, they're fucking ridiculous, all right? I mean, Leprechaun in Space, Leprechaun in the Hood, Leprechaun Back to the Hood. They're dumb fucking movies. But you know what? Some of them at least kind of had fun with what they were doing. It's like, you know, they're dumb, fun movies. The first one I can easily sit down and rewatch. It's like, it's kind of like Child's Play or Child's Play 2. It tries to be scary, but there's also some fun, and they're kind of self-aware about it. But this was made by someone who Just like with these other movies, they're made by people who don't have love for the series. This was made by someone who hated the original Leprechaun and said specifically, this is going to be one that people prefer over the original. And it's like, man, that's saying something, because the original Leprechaun is not that good, but this is so much worse. Then again, I didn't expect much, seeing that it was from Lionsgate, the same people that churned out Texas Chainsaw 3D and some other really shit movies. But it's also from WWE Films, because the Leprechaun is played by a wrestler from there. I think his name's like Hornswoggle or something. This one tries to be so serious that it's actually kind of annoying. Like, okay, this time it's about a small group of teens. Like, you got 2 guys, 2 girls, and you know, they're each in relationships. One is very touchy-feely, they're making out almost all the time, and the other, the main girl and her boyfriend, they're kind of taking it slow. And, you know, then they kind of establish that there might be some cheating going on. It's the typical horror movie formula. They did the same shit in Texas Chainsaw 3D. Whatever. But, so they're visiting Ireland, and there's a small village. And basically it turns out this village stole gold from the leprechauns. And so what they eventually came to some agreement where they sacrifice people by locking them in a shotgun shack, and the leprechauns have at them. And I was just thinking, man, you know what this movie needs? It needs Nicolas Cage. Because between Wicker Man and Willy's Wonderland, if this movie was Nicolas Cage fighting off a bunch of evil leprechauns, that would have made the movie fucking worth it. But unfortunately, no, that we don't get that. Despite it being called Origins and having no relation to the other movies, and from what I can remember, the continuity in those movies was fucked as it was. But the thing is, if this movie kept up with, like, its own backstory, like went more into that, because they have this guy talking with his son, and his son's like, oh, we're just killing a bunch of innocent people, and they're like, oh no, they're not innocent.
I'm not sure my son has the stomach for this after all.
Wouldn't it be easier just to leave this village?
Now, you don't abandon your home just because the times get tough.
By letting innocent people die.
No, Sean, not innocent. Outsiders. Now, they came here of their own free will. We're just giving them a little push in the right direction, that's all.
It's like, that would have been a more interesting movie if we focused on those people, but we don't. We just focus on generic teens who get killed. The leprechaun in this movie doesn't even look like a fucking leprechaun, and it doesn't talk. Like, that was the one thing people seem to like about these movies, is Warwick Davis's performance. And, like, Warwick Davis not being in that recent sequel, that, what was it, Leprechaun Returns or something, there was at least a reason that he didn't show up for that, because he said he was too busy trying to be a father. It's like, and he said that he might come back to it eventually, like once his kids are older. There's at least a reason for that. But this movie's a remake. This is trying to be its own thing. It's not fun. It's not stupid, campy fun like some of the other ones were. It's just like, it takes itself so seriously. The leprechaun in this looks like a fucking deformed orc that crab walks on like all fours and roars like a lion. That didn't even need to be Hornswoggle or whoever that guy was. It's like, that could have been anybody. They give him nothing to do. He's not having fun with it. He's just generic cannibalistic creature. It could have been, this didn't even need to be a leprechaun movie at all. They have predator vision. Leprechauns in this have predator vision whenever they see gold. Also, I hate the fact that the one guy who I actually recognized was the first one to go, because I recognized him from Freddy vs. Jason. He's the first one to die out of these 4 characters, and it's like, fuck. And I like how that the one, his girlfriend, she ends up dying because the main characters accidentally killed her. That wasn't even the leprechaun's fault. They're just dumbasses. And then the Leprechaun ends up killing main girl's boyfriend by ripping his spinal cord out. It's like, shit, wasn't expecting that. And eventually the asshole guy that lured them out there and locked them in the shed, his son eventually turns on him and is like, you know, get out of here while you still can, final girl. And then the Leprechaun shows up and kills his asshole father after pushing him down some stairs, which may or may not be a callback to the first movie, because I seem to remember that a person fell down steps in the first one. Another thing about this movie, the leprechauns are killed by sunlight. Like they're fucking vampires or something. It's like, man, the first movie said that they were killed by four-leaf clovers, and I think in the second one they said something about wrought iron, which I think is part of leprechaun mythology, I guess. But like, no, sunlight kills them. More reason that these didn't have to be fucking leprechauns. The movie ends with main girl running, the you know, sun is rising. Yeah, she's running through the woods trying to get away from this thing. She distracts it temporarily with some gold that she throws, and then she gets her weapon, and the one thing that they reference from the first movie is they have her say, "Fuck you, Lucky Charms."
Fuck you, Lucky Charms.
Would have been better if they actually used the line they were gonna use in the original movie. They should have had her say the line, "Your luck just ran out." But no. So she runs away into this field, and like, you know, you hear running around in the high grass, like away from her, away from the sunlight. So they're implying there's more leprechauns out there. And it's this felt more like a Sci-Fi Channel movie than the actual Leprechaun sequel that was a Sci-Fi Channel movie. That one, from what I can remember, was at least having some fun. This sucked. So yeah, that does it for the horror movie sequel, reboot, prequel, remake marathon. Like I said, there's a bunch of other ones that I could have done, but I drove myself insane watching the ones that I did, so I'm just done. As for next month, I actually have 4 blockbuster reviews planned, and they're all going to be animated movies, so you can look forward to those. I know animation is not really my thing. A lot of people seem to like it when MediaWiz does it, but yeah, I'm going to be doing some animated movie reviews, so you can look forward to that next month. But until then, I'm Adam Sykes of the Blockbuster Show, and we will see you guys in the next video.